The book of the prophet Hosea. This is an introduction. To listen to this book of the Bible, go to playlists or enter Holy Bible the Prophets at Christendom. The relationship between God and Israel is vividly portrayed in this book by the prophet's own marriage, unfaithfulness, breakdown, and healing. In chapters 1 to 3, we have Hosea's experience. In chapters 4 to 14, we have God's messages to his people, his judgment and restoration. This is the first and longest of the minor or shorter prophets, called the Book of the 12 in the Hebrew Bible. Chronologically, Amos is a few years earlier. The man and his times. Hosea was one of Isaiah's contemporaries, a prophet of God in the 8th century BC. He was a northerner, and his message was for Israel, the northern kingdom, although he occasionally refers to Judah. Hosea became a prophet at the end of the reign of the nation's last powerful king, Jeroboam II. He prophesied for the next 40 years, until just before Samaria fell to Assyria in 722 BC. During that time, the country went rapidly downhill. Rejection of God and the wholesale adoption of pagan religious practices brought about a moral and political landslide. 2 Kings 14, chapters 23 forwards to 17:41. So that's 2 Kings 14:23 to chapter 17:41. These give the history of the period. The fact that after Jeroboam's death, Israel had 6 kings in just over 20 years, 4 of them assassinating their predecessors, gives us some idea of the nation's instability. Hosea's great themes are love, God's covenant relationship with his people, judgment, and hope. What Israel's unfaithfulness meant to God, how he continued to love his covenant people and long for their return to him. The prophet learned through bitter personal experience as the wife he loved betrayed and deserted him. His message comes straight from the heart. That is what makes his book so moving, so universal, and so special. Hosea, then, is a book about love, God's love and human love. God told Hosea to take a wife he knew would be unfaithful. The prophet's heartbreak mirrored God's own feelings about his unfaithful people. It is also about human responsibility, about the choices for or against God that Israel had to make, and that we too have to make. Wrong choices have consequences for our lives. It was never easy to be one of God's prophets, but for Hosea it was especially difficult. He was not only to preach about God's persistent love in the face of rejection, he was to live out that love, illustrating his message by his life. It was a costly ministry. God's first instruction to Hosea was a strange one. The wife he was to marry was immoral, a surprising start for a prophet. These words have been written with hindsight and describe not what Gomer was at the time of her marriage, but what she became, a picture of Israel's unfaithfulness to God. Yet despite wrong choices, which brought not freedom but slavery, this was not the end of Gomer's story or of Hosea's marriage. God gave him a second instruction, to keep on loving with a love that never gives up, just like God's love. See chapter 3. We are given no glimpse of Hosea's emotions, of the hurt he felt when Gomer left him, or the courage he needed to renew the relationship. We don't know whether his marriage had a happy ending, For this is not the love story of Hosea and Gomer. It is God's love story, not simply past history, but God's word for us today. Hosea is not an easy book to read and is often uncomfortable, even frightening. God is pictured several times as a wild animal, destructive and dangerous. It sounds offensive, but it is an important aspect of Hosea's message. Sin is serious, its consequences devastating. God's love is not superficial and sentimental, but costly and transforming. It cost Jesus the cross. Hosea's contemporaries, however, had forgotten the first commandment: no other God beside me. They wanted to hedge their bets so that if the Lord failed them, they had another God to rely on. And so they turned to Baal, a Canaanite fertility god, and found Baal worship less demanding than God's. There are feminist studies of Hosea bringing disturbing insights into the story. But this is not about the woman Gomer. It is about God's love. The symbols are inadequate. God's love is freely offered. The choice is ours. Here is the greatness of the Bible. It reflects an ancient patriarchal culture, but transcends it with equality for all, proclaiming to every new generation that God, though grieved by our rejection, yet endlessly forgives, offering through Jesus a way back into his love. End of introduction.